Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, but please call me Alex, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today I'm joined by Matthew Dubins. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alexander. It's great to be here.
So, for those who don't know you very well or who are meeting you for the first time, could you share a bit about who you are and what you do?
I got started in this whole data science endeavor really during my undergraduate career when I was in a psychology program. And as part of the psychology program, I was required to take an intro to statistics course. That course ended up being just incredibly formative for me. It introduced me to quantitative thinking and then ultimately to what they called at the time statistical computing, which is basically like doing coding in order to achieve data analysis and data visualization. Currently what I do, I run a business focused on providing analytics or data science services to the nonprofit industry in North America. But we'll get to some more detailed info about that soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So, if you can dig a bit deeper, how did you get started with working with nonprofits? Like, why nonprofits versus any other industry?
So it was kind of random. I sort of fell into it, which, as far as I understand, is quite common in the nonprofit industry. I just gotten out of the academic space after finishing my master's degree at University of Toronto. I knew the academic lifestyle wasn't for me, so I ventured to find a job that would make use of my great love for data analysis and statistical computing. I didn't know where I wanted to work, so I simply sent out a whole boatload of resumes in the hopes that something would stick and I'd get a job. Spray and pray, if you will. It worked because I got an interview at the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation, and ultimately they offered me the job. The rather verbose title of the job was Run Data and Research Coordinator. Basically, I was doing a whole bunch of data analytics and reporting for the Run for the Cure. It was there that I learned that the nonprofit industry was a kind of a comfort zone for me. Yes, I was doing data analytics and all, but the subject matter became important for me. Thanks to that random occurrence of me getting a job at CBCF and not at a for profit business, the nonprofit world would go on to form the main thrust of my career.
Yeah, I find I've also noticed that working in the nonprofit space is very comforting. It's very humane. And a lot of people who find themselves in there, you're right, mostly by accident, according to the experience that I've had as well, talking to various people. Once you get to that space, it's very hard to leave. Like it's just, you feel more comforted there. From there, what was the driving force behind starting Donor Science, which is the company you now run?
Yes. So I guess it was due in part to my dissatisfaction with the last company that I worked for that motivated me to reflect on what my ideal job would be. Now, if you're stalking me on LinkedIn, you'll see that the last company that I worked for was a for profit business and not a non for profit. As I reflected on what my ideal job would be, my mind was directed to a very underdeveloped business idea that I had. So the gist of that idea was like so. So there are over 80,000 charities in Canada, registered charities, I should say. Some of those charities are quite big, and they're great at commanding a lot of donor money and similarly equipped for doing data analytics to support that fundraising. A lot of charities are quite small, however, and they don't have the knowledge of the value of data analytics or the ability to carry it out. These charities don't command donor money even remotely as well as the larger charities. I thought to myself, what if I take publicly available data about these charities, and this data includes contact info, bear in mind, and contact them to offer my analytics services. Looking at this idea, I was enchanted by the prospect of striking out on my own. The subject matter was great, the independence was very tempting, and clearly the opportunity to continue doing the stuff I loved was a major driver.
So, what are some of the services that you offer then at this point?
So the services that I offer center around predictive modeling, and that predictive modeling can include annual giving donors or even major gift predictive modeling, segmentation. So preparing data from a nonprofit that is about to embark on a particular annual giving campaign, just so that they are contacting people with the right messaging at the right time, using the right language. Also, data mining and survey creation as well.
So, I want to jump into some of these different services, but before we get there, why is data science important at all? Like, why or what could a nonprofit benefit from access to some of this information? And what is the possibility of using this data? Like, what are the possible outcomes of using this data?
So, I feel like when I think about a lot of the smaller nonprofits, the question isn't really, why is the data science so important, or what are the benefits of the data science for them. I feel like a lot of these nonprofits needs to know, what's the value of data. They are so suspicious of, or wary of investing in data, and instead they will direct their administrative money toward paying their fundraisers, paying their office staff, paying their cause marketers, or what have you. It's a really serious problem that so many of these nonprofits treat data as a luxury that they can't afford. And I've often heard the refrain, "We know our donors." Like, really? Like, you know each of your donors personally, and that knowledge is all you need? Uh, I just I just don't buy it. But they say that, and then that becomes a way of them saying they don't need data to help them. Now, what I really want nonprofits to know about is you can't afford to ignore data. You really don't even care if you're a small nonprofit. You want to run a tight ship, then you need to keep tabs on your fundraising. How much money are you raising each year? How many donors do you have? How many are lapsing? How many are you retaining? How loyal are your donors? How many are giving at various monetary or frequency levels? How's your monthly donor program doing? What campaigns are working at getting a really good response versus what campaigns aren't working. I could really go on and on, but I won't. Data is just such an important ally to the growth of any nonprofit. And you want to ignore it, sure, but ignore it at your own peril.
So, when you're talking about data, are you talking about the nonprofit's own data that they collect inadvertently by having donors or volunteers? Are you talking about data that they can access through a third party system or as publicly available data? Or are you talking about kind of combining the two, augmenting their existing data with data that's available in the public?
Really, I'm talking about in-house data, because third-party data can definitely be helpful, and I do help a certain number of nonprofits with third-party data, but in-house data is royalty. There's just so much that you can learn about your own charity, and so many opportunities to just really run a tight ship and to learn what's working and what isn't. Who are your loyal donors and who isn't, who are your frequent donors and who isn't, and so forth. And like all of that is contained in your in-house data. Now, of course, you could be like a really underdeveloped charity and the only data that you keep is in Excel, like a Microsoft Excel sheet. And sure, I don't really support maintaining your nonprofit's data in Excel sheets, but if you are really like extremely conscientious about using MS Excel, then you can do that. And you can gain data insights out of, your random Microsoft Excel sheets. But again, it requires like a lot of really heartfelt oversight. And I don't fully recommend it. But yeah, the in-house data is just so important.
And then would you leverage, or do you need to leverage a CRM or other kind of internal systems as well? Or maybe a better question would be, how much data would a nonprofit need before they could start benefiting from analyzing that data? Are we talking about like a brand new nonprofit, one that's been around for many years, but might have a messy, uncohesive, unaggregated perspective on their donor data? Like, where is that starting point where you can come in and say, okay, here's how we can look at this data, here's what you can do with this data, and then next steps?
In my view, the moment that your nonprofit has achieved systematic data collection, whether it's that hotshot data entry person who is assiduously managing those MS Excel sheets, or you have like a donor CRM that your staff are entering info into. So long as you have that systematic data entry, then you can start doing data analytics. Really, it doesn't even matter if you're small. It just matters that the data is systematic.
Okay, so let's go a bit deeper then into some of the services you offer, or at least the more popular ones. I've seen on the website you offer 5 main ones. Let's maybe go one by one. The first one I saw was the donor focus model scoring. What does that mean?
Okay, so I'm going to try to stay as untechnical as possible in describing these things. So do bear with me. Donor focus model scoring, it's actually an online web app I created that enables one to enter in a gift file, and the app will go into that gift file and look at all of the patterns in terms of giving preferences of various types of donors. To be a little bit more precise, the donors that we're looking at are donors who upgrade their giving, donors who reactivate after having lapsed for a year or so, donors who are likely to go on and lapse, or churn is another word for it, and those donors who really just have been inactive for quite a while. So it looks at all of those types of donors, and then it tries to predict, for next year, which of your donors is likely to fall into any one of those categories. Because after all, one of the biggest value propositions of any data analytics, and especially this app that I created, is to cut the cost of donor solicitation, and to a slightly smaller extent, to try to even increase the return on investment with certain donors. Does that make sense?
Totally. So once the your system has analyzed the data, what is the basic outcome? So you said it categorizes donors into certain sections, and that allows nonprofits to do what exactly?
it allows them to figure out who best to contact for different reasons. So, for example, a recent client used my web app in order to figure out which donors from their, my client is an agency, a fundraising agency. And so their client was the eventual beneficiary of the use of my web app. So yeah, their client was about to run an acquisition campaign using donors who had lapsed. But they're like this nonprofit that the agency was dealing with had a lot of lapsed donors. So they wanted to kind of thin the herd, so to speak, and figure out, which of these lapsed donors would be the most receptive to reactivating in this acquisition campaign. So yeah, they ran this gift file through my system, and the system categorized a certain subset of those donors as donors who were likely to reactivate. So they took this list of donors, then sent off the list to the mail house in order to furnish data for their acquisition campaign.
Yeah, this sounds like a very valuable analysis. I know that Salesforce does offer certain elements of this out of the box with their Einstein Analytics platform, but it's awesome to see that you have something very specific for nonprofits and for donors. Do you have any parallels between those two systems? Do you have any kind of AI or machine learning functionality behind the scenes, or is it more just custom algorithms that you built out?
No, it is actually machine learning. Yeah, no, it's 100%. It uses predictive modeling, which I tend to use the term predictive modeling instead of machine learning, but honestly, they could be used interchangeably, in my opinion. Anyway, yeah, no, it uses predictive modeling in order to figure out who is most likely to fall into each of those categories.
That's great. The second service you offer is about discovering new major gift donors. Can you speak a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, well, that is actually another instance of a service that is fueled by predictive modeling. So in this case, the idea is to find out, okay, for those donors who were never major gift donors before, which of them looks most like your current major gift donors? Because the thinking behind it is if you can score your donors who haven't already given a major gift according to how much they look like current major gift donors, then the folks who score the highest, they'll be the ones most likely to respond to major gift solicitation. But in order to do this, I need a lot of data. So it can be a lot. These sorts of major gift models make use of biographical information, potentially membership information, volunteer information, event information, and certainly gift history, and any other kind of qualitative information that the nonprofit stores about that individual. Certainly, like, let's say it's like a disease awareness charity, uh, then knowing the purpose behind why a particular donor has given to the nonprofit can be pretty powerful. So, that person might say, oh, family member was afflicted by this particular disease. And if they have enough of those flags in their system, where, a family member was afflicted or they themselves are afflicted, like that ends up actually being really good info. And anyway, last but not least, it is often helpful to append third-party info about donors wherever possible. And, if you're in Canada, that's going to look something like, an Environics Analytics Wealthscapes append. If you're in America, that's going to look, something like a wealth screening, like from Donor Search, for example. And I find those third-party appends, for the most part, helpful because they give you a kind of an approximate sense of the donor's philanthropic capacity. To what extent can the donor even part with a considerable sum of dollars? And anyway, yeah, putting that all together, you then score the donors on their, how much they look like a major gift donor. And, that could look like gift of 5,000 plus or 10,000 plus or 20,000, whatever. It varies from, one nonprofit to the next. And, I score the database and I tell them like, okay, these are your people. These are who you want to contact. But also, I generate like a lot of donor data insights from these projects because naturally, when you're searching for patterns, you invariably find them. There's patterns like everywhere in the world. For me, it's like being a kid in a candy store finding these patterns. And I always write up, what I found in terms of these donor data insights into like a nicely formatted interactive report. And then, as for next steps, I tell them like, okay, this is what you have to do. You reintegrate the data and then, approach these people who are they have a high likelihood to become major gift donors, and they also have a high capacity. And then they go off and they do what they need to do. And that's, sorry, that was a mouthful, but that's, the whole major donor thing.
You mentioned a key element here. You mentioned that it's important or it's good to know the reason why a donor gave. And that's, I think, a key point for most nonprofits is if you can find out the reason why, that can really benefit some of these predictive models. Would you agree?
Oh, I 100% would agree. So, if you have any survey data on file, surveys are a great way of bubbling that kind of important, human-centric insight into the awareness of not only the person analyzing the data, but all the decision makers at the nonprofit.
You also mentioned that predictive learning or machine learning requires a lot of data, and some nonprofits might not have sufficient data to be able to analyze. And you mentioned going out to get trends and other data. So that is a sense of augmenting the nonprofit's existing data with more public trends. Is that right?
So I don't want to leave you or your listeners with a mistaken impression about modeling. You don't need 20,000 donors or 50 or 100,000 plus donors in order to do major gift predictive modeling. When I talk about going to third-party data sources, it's just about finding a different perspective on your donors that isn't already captured in your current database. If you want, you could certainly do a major gift predictive model without the help of an outside source. I just find in most cases it is helpful to get that perspective.
There is a elusive chase of trying to find high value or high wealth donors. And you might have a nugget or two in a nonprofit, for example, that's kind of hiding, waiting for the right moment to present themselves. But I also know that there are certain systems out there or applications that you can buy or lean onto to be able to find them and to appeal to them. Do you work with any of those kinds of data, or is it really like you said before, focusing on the nonprofit's current data?
I mean, I tend more often than not to focus on a nonprofit's current data. I know there's a well screening company that I work with in the States where they will actually provide you with lists of donors who they have on file from various like public sources of information, and all you have to do is tell them what are the causes that you would hope these donors had given to, and how much money are you hoping the donors have already given? And they'll actually give you the names and contact info of these donors who would be completely new to the organization. But I think the message that I want to leave with you is you have a better chance at convincing donors with whom you already have a relationship with to give you a significant sum of money than you have of convincing someone completely new to give you a lot of money. It's just so important to treat donors like human beings and not like ATM machines where you're just pressing a button and they eject a lot of cash money at you. So yeah, focus on the relationships that you already have because those are the most likely ones.
Yeah, well said. I agree. The next service, or I don't think we'll have time to go through all the services, but one of the next services I want to touch upon was Donor FAM, FAM. What does that mean?
Donor Fam is another web app that I created that just simply does like RFM database segmentation. And, it sounds very technical, but at the heart of this kind of segmentation is putting your donors into groups according to how recently they gave to you, the number of gifts in their most recent year of giving, and also the monetary level that they gave at in their most recent year. And that's really all it is. It's just doing like really simple analytics to show you which are your most profitable or loyal or frequent donors. That's it.
Up until now, we've been talking a lot about donors. Is your practice mostly focused around donations, or does it manage other trends like volunteering or other types of constituents?
Yeah, no, it's really just donors so far. Theoretically, I could work on a project that involves members instead of donors. I've yet to come across such project requirements, however.
So there's quite a bit of data out there, either internally to a nonprofit or available. I'm curious to know some of the ethical issues about data science that a nonprofit would need to be aware of. How do you manage within an organization, certain private information, the PII they call it, to making sure that only certain people have access to data, that it's not shared publicly, credit card information, stuff like that. Do you offer any kind of best practices toward the ethical parts of data science?
Okay, so I mean, you mentioned about PII. What I do for the most part is to tell nonprofits not to share with me names and street addresses unless obviously the project requirements demand it, which sometimes they actually do. Now, I mean, there's a whole other world of ethical quagmires that nonprofits can get into with their data. And I would actually be remiss if I didn't mention my analytics consultant friend, Meenakshi Das, as you could do like a whole podcast episode on ethical issues in data science based on what I've seen her write about.
So then, in terms of AI. We talked about AI, machine learning, predictive learning. This is obviously a relatively new ability to analyze data. I'm curious to know where the trend is going in terms of AI. Like, it's obviously the shiny new toy. There's a lot of things you can do with it. What has been the impact in your perspective in the last few years, and where do you see things going in terms of AI capabilities?
Well, it's had a really big impact from my perspective. And it will continue to have a really big impact as it becomes adopted more and more. It's still, in my view, it hasn't been adopted nearly enough. Yes, it has been out for several years, but the nonprofit industry is fairly conservative in the sorts of technology and tools that it adapts. The impact really at the end of the day is all about making your donor solicitations more efficient and more impactful. I mean, there will always be people who are just not going to budge when it comes to their relationship with your nonprofit. Machine learning or AI helps you separate the wheat from the chaff. When you focus on donors who are quite likely to respond to your solicitation, and you're able to identify those donors on whom you're going to waste your time, your solicitations become way more efficient because you're spending less money and you're still getting just an amazing response. Another thing that I've seen sort of showing up is the use of AI to efficiently formulate these solicitation emails. So using all of the data available of your donors on file, I've seen there's this one particular tool that will formulate the first draft of an email to your donors, and that seems even to be even more of a shinier tool. And yeah, just anything that streamlines the use of machine learning, CRMs that constantly rescore donors as new information comes in about those donors. That might actually come to be more widely adopted. I mean, we're just going to find it occupying more and more of the industry as time goes on.
What are some of the limits of data science? I mean, you have all these great tools. You can do so many things, analyzing data to make it a more personalized message. I love the fact that actually there's the possibility of an AI building an email from scratch. That's taking email templating to a whole new level. But what are some of the limits? What are the things that it can't do or it shouldn't do? Maybe is a better question.
Okay, in terms, I like the question of what shouldn't it do. AI or machine learning should not take the place of well thought out human donor relations. It just, I think if you remove the human element and the donor feels as though they're just on some sort of a conveyor belt, then it's going to fall flat. A nonprofit needs a lot of the human touch in their relations with their donors. Now, one of the things that data science cannot do for nonprofits is to identify biases in the source data. So, who is being systematically ignored? Who is, in fact, underprivileged, or what data isn't being collected about the individuals in your nonprofit. because after all, if your database doesn't track certain kinds of information about your donors, the data science techniques aren't going to be able to tell you anything about the biases that are inherent in what was collected about donors.
Since you like analyzing trends, from your perspective, how has COVID had an impact towards nonprofits?
So, in my view, COVID has created this kind of urgency to hustle more when it comes to ensuring the future of one's nonprofit. I've seen increased activity since 2020. And while it's possible that it might peter out as time goes on, we'll see about that.
I've noticed also that, just to add a bit more color to it, I've noticed that a lot of nonprofits that might have done a lot of things manually or offline have been forced to embrace the online world more than ever before to streamline the limited resources that they do have at the moment to get the maximum out of it. So I think using better analytical tools, for example, is one of the tools in their workshop that they should leverage.
Yeah, no, totally agree.
So what's in your short-term future then? Where would you like to be in the next few years?
Uh, More data. I'm also hoping for opportunities to collaborate with my peers and hopefully even to get opportunities to delegate work to others.
And you wrote something interesting on LinkedIn on your profile. You said, "I won't stop until I've left my mark." What do you mean by that?
Well, it means that when it comes to data analytics, I would like to see myself as the force of nature, so much so that I help change the nonprofit industry, even by just a little. If I do, that'll bring even more meaning to what I've done. The knowledge that I've left the nonprofit industry a little better than when I entered it.
And that's great. Matthew, where can people find more about you online?
Certainly by checking out my website, www.donorscience, as in science class, www.donorscience.ca.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, you're welcome very much. Thanks, Alex.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.